Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So my name is Marilyn. I've been here at AJ for a little over 8 years. I am the San Mateo and Social Outreach Director at AJ. I started at AJ working specifically with higher level math, but right into year one, I started working with the K-8 department, and I would argue is among the first to start implementing and start working with students on the entrance exams as well. So I've been working with the K-8 populace for a while now. I will argue since 2017. So it's been a great time here.
And my name is Micah. This is my 5th year here with AJ. I am the office director here at Los Altos Fremont Avenue office. And relevant to tonight, before I started with AJ, I was a middle school classroom teacher.
Cool. And I'm Elizabeth. I run the K-8 program here, as well as all of the private school application, everything that goes into that, all the tests, all the interviews, which we'll get into later. There's a lot of components to that process, but I oversee the entire program, and I've been here for a little over 7 years now.
Yeah, so when we, just sort of big picture, a little bit of where AJ Tutoring is coming from. So AJ Tutoring was founded by Aaron and Joe, that's where the AJ comes from, back in 2005. And originally, AJ really focused on test preparation on SAT and ACT. And over time, naturally, a lot of the families we were working with asked, do you support students on other classes, on academics? And so we grew from there. And over the years, families had younger siblings or friends who had younger children, and families began to ask, okay, but what about my middle schoolers? What about my elementary schoolers? And so informally, when families would ask, we started working with, or maybe as needed basis with younger students. And then by 2016, we decided, this was something an aspect that we needed to take more seriously. And we created our K-8 department. So, a dedicated staff that is really thinking about how do we best serve our younger students. In a similar way, right, the families were asking us, can you support us as our students are applying to, private middle and high schools? And in 2017, we began in a more formalized way to support those application process. Over the pandemic, which obviously was really challenging, especially for those of us with children, there was a real increase in demand, especially for our youngest students. And so in 2020, our K-8, services really doubled in size and became, a really significant part of what AJ does. And, we continue to provide high quality support, for students of all ages.
So I went back and pulled a whole bunch of numbers about our hours, and I was actually only able to pull, I think, from 2018, maybe. And we were at almost 150,000 hours with K-8 students, but remember, we'd been doing work before that. So we have quite a few reps with these students, and we have 17 offices. So this is also spread out all over the Bay Area. So we have a lot of knowledge about the local curriculums, about the different demands placed on kids, and just sort of everything that they're dealing with. All right, we're going to get into a little bit about what is typical, what we see from kids coming in, and then we'll talk about what AJ does and how we help with that. So I thought we'd start with kind of what's expected emotionally at each age level. I think we don't always talk about the social emotional component of stuff, but it has a huge impact on learning. It impacts how we choose to teach kids. It affects how they learn and what motivates them. So at the K-2 age, kids are major people pleasers. They love to show off and be proud of themselves, talk about their accomplishments. And right around 2nd grade, we start to see self-criticism come into play. Of course, this is all, child development is more fluid than it seems, but everybody's at slightly different levels, but this is kind of like our typical stuff. So after they start moving into third grade, they do still like being recognized, but they don't want to be talked down to. So they start to be a little bit more in tune with like when somebody is babying them, or when it feels fake. So they want to be recognized, but in a really authentic way. And then they also start to develop perspective. So they are able on like the emotional side to kind of build empathy a little bit better and see kind of where other people are coming from. And then as we start to move into middle school, they feel pretty similar, but they get better at hiding their emotions. So the sensitivity increases, but sometimes the ability to tell when something hasn't landed right decreases. It may not feel that way at home, but remember they feel very safe at home. So they may explode, but it's because they've been bottling things up all day long. And then they get home and it is easier for them to show how they're really feeling. They're acutely aware of other people's perceptions of them, so that we start to see a lot more self-esteem issues, some confidence drops, but they also want to be very independent. So they're toying this line between like, I need a lot of help, but also I don't want it. We're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, but just a quick note, for our K-5 kids, they can have a hard time focusing for longer than an hour, which is why our sessions tend to be 30, 45 minutes or 60 minutes. So I thought this is a nice way to kind of figure out what you can expect out of your kiddos at home. For super quick calculation, you can take their age in years and multiply it by 2 to 4, and that's about how many minutes you can expect them to be able to sit and focus on one thing for one amount of time. Something like TV is going to be different. This is stuff that they want to be focused on, or things that they don't necessarily want to be focused on, and it's pretty recommended that you not multiply that number more than 5, because it can get pretty frustrating and difficult for them to focus for that much longer. So even in sessions, if we're doing an hour, our tutors will pivot and kind of shift tasks to keep their kiddos engaged, instead of having to pull teeth to get them to stay focused on one thing for too long. Okay, what is going on with middle schoolers? We see a lot of things happen in middle school. I am not a doctor, so I'm not going to spend too long talking about the brain. But there is this theory that our brains develop from the back to the front. So as they reach middle school, their brain is developing the front area, which is that prefrontal cortex. You may have heard doctors talking about that. But the prefrontal cortex is where they handle a lot of like mental and emotional regulation. It also helps them regulate their behavior, and it's responsible for executive functioning. So what ends up happening is, as that area of the brain is under construction, they start to rely more on their amygdala for decision making, and the amygdala is responsible for fight or flight, and it's like a much more emotionally reactive center of the brain. We don't use it. We're relying on our prefrontal cortex. However, because it's under construction, they kind of revert back to a much more emotional area. So that's why we see middle schoolers be a lot more impulsive, be a lot more reactive, and a lot more emotional in general. And then you add on top of that their puberty hormones, and it's kind of just a mess. So you may have kids, I hear this from parents a lot, where like a student is very responsible, very conscientious, very calm, and then suddenly they hit middle school and they lose it all. And it's like, what the heck is going on? Well, it's because that area of their brains is currently under development, and their bodies are starting to rely on the more reactive areas of the brain. Okay, so now that we've got an understanding of kind of what's going on with kids and what's reasonable to expect, I wanted to talk about the different types of students we see. So I've put them into different buckets. The first bucket I called was learning loss. And I think this can actually be 3 different things that we see from kids. So the first one that we're hearing a lot about lately is the pandemic. Kids missed a lot during COVID when we were quarantining. And especially at the K-8 level, that could be a lot of foundational gaps. So they may be okay, but they'll start to hit a certain point, particularly in math, where if their foundations aren't strong, they're going to really struggle. So that's one form of learning loss. The most common, I would say, is that middle one, which is style mismatch. So this is like they're understanding it with you, a friend can explain it, but for whatever reason in the classroom, it's not clicking. And everybody learns differently and everybody teaches differently. It's partly why we spend so much time making sure we have the right tutor-student match, because not every teacher works for every child. And it's not to say that the teacher's bad at their job, it just the style doesn't work. So they can have like a learning loss from a mismatched style. And then the last one that we see kids with is learning differences. So we've got a lot of kids with established, diagnosed learning differences, and they just need a little bit extra support individually. So they're coming in for that. Okay, I pulled some numbers just so we could talk a little bit about the pandemic and kind of contextualize it a little bit and what we're seeing as far as learning loss goes. Stanford runs this thing called the Educational Opportunity Project and pull different test scores and see how kids are ranking compared to national expectations or state expectations. So you can see different school districts are at very different places, but it's important to keep in mind that our districts have the expectation that kids be at least one grade level above. So when I am training tutors and I run through the standards with them, sometimes new tutors are confused because their kids feel so advanced. And that's because the standards California have set versus the standards the districts have set sometimes have a mismatch because the districts want the kids to be super, super advanced. A positive here is that these numbers are up pretty significantly from last year, which is great. People are starting to close the gap on the COVID learning loss. So Palo Alto School District is currently testing 3 grade levels above where they're expected to be, which is exceptional. If you've got a student in the Palo Alto School District, it may also be very frustrating if they're not testing 3 grade levels above because they're in this very competitive, very rigorous, very demanding cohort of kids. They could still be 1 grade above, but feel very behind. So I think that's important context. Menlo Park is also almost 3 ahead. San Carlos is a little over 1.5. San Mateo is hitting right where we would expect them to be, like for state guidelines. However, the schools may still have this expectation and the teachers could be pushing and putting the pressure on to get the kids to be back up to where those test scores were pre-COVID. So lots of different information that we can pull from this. There's also, I realize I only pulled 4 districts, but it felt like a pretty good sampling of where our kids are. Great news, our kids are still very advanced. Maybe not so great news is that if your specific student is struggling a little bit, it can feel like they're that much more behind, even though they're probably doing very well. Okay, another reason we see kids come in is for executive dysfunction. So a lot of middle school kids who suddenly have multiple classroom teachers with multiple sets of expectations and different processes and systems, and they're just not juggling it. A lot of times these kids are coming in totally fine on content, but they're not doing all the other things it takes to be successful in middle school. So maybe they're not super organized or their time management skills haven't been built yet. Sometimes they don't know how to study or plan for a test. And a lot of times we see kids that really struggle with self-advocacy. So this could be like, I need to email my teacher because I missed an assignment and I need to ask if I can turn it in late, or I missed a few days of school and I need to figure out what I missed, or even like things in class, like I am confused and I need to raise my hand and ask a question. So it's very normal. Like I said, we expect it for middle schoolers. We all at some point learned how to take notes, how to sit as somebody's kind of like spewing at us and take out important information. They haven't had to do that. So a pretty common thing that we do with middle schoolers is basically just teaching them how to be little functional humans because they've never learned to do it. We also see kids for transitional periods. So there's kind of like 3 main things I was able to think of. So transitioning between grades. So you get a lot of kids that want to come in before the next grade level, particularly if they find out that they are going to be with a teacher that's notoriously difficult or in a class that's particularly difficult. So some kids want to work on shoring up foundations and also previewing material between grades. Sometimes they're switching between schools. So the transition from elementary to middle school or the transition from middle school to high school can be pretty intense. And we can alleviate some of that pressure by making sure that their academics feel super solid. Or, should be and or, they could be going from public to private. And the demands of the public schools are different than the demands of the private schools, and kids want to just feel a little bit more prepared for that transition. And then the other transitional period that we see is kids who want to switch tracks, particularly math. They might want to go from a regular math class and be able to place into an accelerated math class the following year. So we help a lot with getting them not only like academically ready for that, but also sort of the confidence level and the responsibility that it takes to be successful executive function wise in those classes. And then the last reason we see kids is because they're bored. So we have a lot of students that are actually pretty advanced, and they come into tutoring because the school isn't challenging them in the way that they need to be challenged. Or there's something that the kid is super, super excited about, but it's not something that the school provides. So it could be something like coding. We get a lot of kids that want to come in for creative writing. They have all these incredible ideas, but the school's doing more informational paper, persuasive essays, that type of thing, and they want to be able to focus on their narratives. Or like I said, math, like a lot of kids come in that are bored in their math classes because it's too easy and the school doesn't have, they're already in the advanced track. And they just want to keep learning and be more challenged.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. There are a lot of things going on with our students, and as she mentioned, many reasons in which we see them. But one thing that we hear a lot from our parents is how they can help. Like, what can we be doing at home, right? The growth shouldn't be solely taking place in the classroom. There's a lot that we can do to further this growth. So I'm going to take a moment to identify some ways that we can do that. And I'll start here with the kindergarten through 5th grade bucket of students here. I'm going to actually move this a little forward here so it's all showing. There we go. Beautiful. So youngsters at this age, Elizabeth gave us a little bit of background on what's kind of happening emotionally, but they're primed to study facts and learn processes that eventually they can rely on as tools for solving problems, right? They also get thrilled by their progress, right? Even if it's happening at a slower pace, there's a lot of, that reward system happening. And they're very attuned to their social environments. They're learning through their peers. They're learning through their parents. They're, shows they're watching, a lot of mimicking going on. Of course, all children are different. There are a lot of different learning styles, and this is kind of the time that they're learning what their best methods are. We're learning what their best methods are. So, as we're going through this particular grade levels, or these particular grade levels, we're starting to learn. We're starting to notice what are these unique learning preferences and these techniques that we can use to help them focus and to help facilitate that growth. So couple buckets here. One of the main things, you'll hear us say this all the time to our parents, is to leverage their interests. Now, at its more basic level, it's find material or content that will keep that student engaged, right? If they are really into sports, well, let's find some material that is related to sports so that they're maintaining that attentiveness. If they're really into Legos, is there a way that we can apply that to some type of, learning mathematical process? But especially at this level, or at this grade level, we get really creative. There are a lot of opportunities for them to develop new skills outside of, even traditional schoolwork, where we can apply some of these developments. So I know kids don't love chores, but chores could be a great opportunity for that development of executive functions, right? We could plan out, okay, how are we going to handle this particular task? How can we problem solve together to get this particular thing done? Cooking. My students love creating, an ingredient list for a cake or something, and then being able to actually implement it when they go home. You can explore mathematical concepts, practice reading, especially in short, directions there, and just unstructured time as well, right? It's important for helping them with their strengthening their creativity, their imagination, self-regulation skills. So as much as, it's easy for us, and we do it too, to pull some worksheets or some, books or materials for them to work through, we know that at this age group, they really do lose focus, right? That 2 to 4 minutes multiplied by their grade level, or excuse me, their age there, is real. And so we want to make sure that if they are participating or willing participants, that it is engaging and it is fun for them as well, especially if it's outside of the classroom, and with their parents, right? The other thing here is just reading. At this level, we see more students coming in who are potentially behind reading level, or maybe not at the level that we're really hoping for them to be, or kids just don't want to read. I have certain students who will just say it's boring, right? I lose track of time. I don't know. I'm not following. So encouraging parents to just sit with their students, or excuse me, with their children, reading. I'll talk a little bit about routines in a moment, but scheduling a dedicated time to read. You can make the reading multidisciplinary. It could be reading related to math. It could be reading related to history. It could be, STEM oriented. Dinosaurs are always a hit. But this is the age where we really, really want them engaging with material and reading, right? Third bucket here is practice working without the parents' attention, without our attention, right? We want to build independence. And it's at this age, again, it's going to be a little bit of a slower process, right? The goal is to get them to fully be independent at an older age. But, as you mentioned, we can carve out, okay, our kid at this age group can pay attention for X amount of time. So I'm going to practice with that with an example. Okay, I want you to do this particular activity. I'm going to check back in 10 minutes and see how you did, right? It gives them that opportunity to apply or to complete that task, right? It gives them a little bit of autonomy with us still being, involved and in the background a little bit. And if they were successful, that's where that praise kicks in, right? Great work. If they're not, or if we see that they're lagging a little behind, that's okay. All right, how are we doing? I'm going to check back in a little bit, right? We want to avoid general question like, how's it going, buddy? Because these kids get distracted. They're going to start talking about different things, right? We really do want it to be focused on that particular task, but that does help with that independence that we're trying to eventually build, right? And over time, right, students at this age, they're going to be able to gradually handle longer and longer periods of working independently, which is, that end goal. And then routines, right? These are younger students. So the routines shouldn't be super, super rigid where we have to sit with them and build out Google Calendars or anything like that. But we do want them to have, expectations of, okay, mom mentioned we're going to read before bed for 20 minutes, and that's going to be a daily routine that we're going to have, and they start to expect that, right? Or, homework needs to be done before I go and hang out with Jimmy down the block, right? Start implementing these soft routines, these softer expectations, so that they're used to that, and so that it's a lot easier for them when they enter middle school. And to Elizabeth's point earlier, have multiple expectations of them, multiple teachers, multiple assignments due. They'll be able to start implementing routines and schedules for themselves a lot easier once they've already been exposed to that at the parent and guardian level, right? Now, looking at our lovely middle schoolers, a lot of what was mentioned at the kindergarten through 5th grade level still somewhat applies. I would say still leveraging their interests, right? We still want to make sure that we're encouraging them, right? There's a little bit more independence at this point in time. So encouraging them to, okay, your teacher mentioned you got to read a little bit more fiction. What are you interested in? Can we find some historical context related to that? Or, if we need to practice typing or whatever, can we tie it into something that you're interested in. I sometimes even, I think Elizabeth has recommended this to me before, is, making an educational TikTok about a topic that they're interested in or that the teacher expects them to write about. Maybe not even their own interest, but the medium that we use, the TikTok, I sound so much older, but utilizing something that they're already interested in as an informative, as like a presentation tool. Still, that definitely still applies at this, grade level, but maybe in a different way, right? Of course, we still want them reading. We still want to tie into a little routine here, but I think parents can really help, and guardians here can really help the middle schoolers. There's a lot going on. To the point that was made earlier, they're forming their own individual identities, right? They're learning these skills to be independent, to be productive, a little emotional independence from their parents, and maybe more mature relationships with their friends. So a big, I would say, argue one of the best things that parents can do is help with self-regulation, right? Managing attitudes, feelings, behaviors to then enable goal-directed actions that will then be necessary for success in schools, relationships, eventually the workplace, right? There is a significant increase in planning, that goal-directed behavior that I mentioned, but they still, it's still a learning process for them to organize this information efficiently, or even monitor their behavior, or even consider long-term consequences. The amount of my middle schoolers that are like, oh, I forgot to turn in my homework, no big deal. And it's like, no, we don't want to make that a habit. It is kind of a big deal, but they don't necessarily see, maybe it's not worth any points. It's just submit the assignment, which we see a lot of. To them, there's no connection as to what that consequence might be down the line. So some ways in which we encourage parents to support our students is really helping with that expectation aspect of it, right? Being familiar with what each teacher expects of their student. Does this teacher not grade homework? Does this teacher post the assignments or tests nights before? What's going on, right? And help decide with your student or with your child here, what feels reasonable that we can tackle in given moments of time, right? Let's then make a plan for that particular thing, right? Parents can communicate what those expectations are through their kid. We all expect them to do their homework. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it all, in a timely manner. So working with them, my goal is to not have us cram for tests before the night before, and then help with that follow through. Because again, you can tell your kid, hey, let's not cram, let's not procrastinate. They're not always going to listen. And so I'll talk a little bit about with the predictability of it all, but checking in, how are we doing with this particular goal, with this expectation we have for, whatever it is that we're discussing here. And then helping with that implementation. All of these kind of go together, but can we help make the process a bit more simple, right? Maybe we do start to introduce calendaring methods, which sometimes I'll teach my 7th and 8th graders. Google Calendar, it's such a great tool, helping them set alarms for these due dates, keep track of that, and then help them set up a workplace, right? As much as my students will argue that they can do homework in bed, I'm like, no, you can't. It's just not going to work. You're going to fall asleep. You're going to get distracted. Let's set that aside, and starting to teach them that early on. And then the predictability that I was speaking of earlier, teaching them to schedule. This is great. I work with high schoolers as well. And when I'm working with my freshman student, my sophomore students, some of them struggle with all of the different tasks that are expected of them, and they cannot plan their weeks. They're still young, right? There's still a lot to learn. But if we can work with our kids at the middle school level, when they do have multiple things going on, to start scheduling, to start planning, it's going to make it that much easier when they do that transition from middle school to high school. Frequent check-ins with our students, and then mentioning, there's dedicated social time, right? Complete these tasks, then we have, the ability to hang out with friends or go on social media or utilize the phone, whatever that, reward or social, time is for that particular kid. And there are a ton of great resources. We've listed a few here, some online tools that are a little bit more on the kind of content side of things. I know a little bit of what was spoken of before, a little bit more study skills, executive functioning, but there are a ton of resources. We utilize these with our students, but I'll kind of comment on a few here. I'm sure parents have heard of IXL. A lot of teachers will actually assign material from IXL. It's a really, really great tool. It has the state standards. It has sample questions that you can access without a login. There are extended use of practice problems organized by grade level, topic, and just standards with a login, but it's great for targeted practice. So if you notice, we really got to go back and shore up some of those pre-algebra skills. This is a great tool, carve out, and there's a timer on it, there's a score logging on it, and say, okay, we're going to do this for 15 minutes, right? Prodigy, kind of skipped over that one. That one's a good one. It's really fun, curriculum aligned, learning opportunities. It goes from, I want to say, 1st to 8th grade. On the English language arts side of things, Read Theory is a great one. Original passages created. They're really interactive. They self-adjust to reading level. It's really great for reading comprehension. And you can create an account, kind of monitor student progresses on there. And yeah, some other tools. We have Duolingo. A lot of my middle schoolers really like Duolingo. Great for learning another language. Easy to use on the phone or iPad. If again at the middle school level, Google Calendar is going to be a great tool to start to implement, or whatever calendaring device. Even the iPhone or whatever phone they have, starting to use their own personal calendars or notification reminders. The library, that's a great one. Just having them utilize that space, maybe even as their workspace, they'll have kind of multiple things that they can benefit from. Literary materials, but also just a dedicated space. And AJ Tutoring. So AJ Tutoring is here to also be a resource. And so I'll leave it to Micah here to talk a little bit about what we can do to support you.
Definitely. Thanks, Marilyn.
Of course.
So
there we go.
yeah, so here at AJ, when I think about the students, our K-8 students that we work with, I would say in general, we're working on some combination of these 3 main big ideas: either direct academic support for something that's happening in the classroom, right? Enrichment that kind of goes above and beyond the classroom, and then application support in terms of applying to private middle and high schools. So thinking about the AJ way, thinking sort of big picture, what's going to be true for all of our support. We're a company made of professional tutors. All of our tutors complete rigorous assessment and training before they begin with any students. Many of our tutors come to AJ already with lots of relevant experience in education, in subject areas. And then beyond that, even for those of us who are, here, we continue, right? It doesn't stop with being hired. AJ has continuous training, and we meet and share best practices, throughout the year, and are really able to share a lot of the institutional knowledge that we've gained, on the particularities of the curriculum of a specific school district. Things like that. And so that's the sort of our professionalism. Connection, one of the strengths of AJ Tutoring is that we work one-on-one, right? A tutor works one-on-one with your child, and that same tutor is going to be connecting one-on-one with you. And so as a result, I'm going to be talking about in sort of generalities about what we often see, but the reality is everything is different for every student because every child is unique. And this one-on-one model really allows a very high level of customization to really figure out what's going to be the best for this child. And related to that in terms of building the rapport, building the connection with the student, for some families, having that second adult, right, that person who, or third adult, right, that person who's not a parent, who's not a direct, directly there in terms of expectations. I often think about for my students that I, as a tutor, for some of them, are one of the few adults in their lives that they don't really owe anything to. The parent, whether we as parents, and I'm a parent myself, whether we as parents are intentionally pushing these things onto our students, right? We know our children have all sorts of feelings about what they think we're expecting from them. Certainly teachers have expectations, but as a tutor, I'm really there just to support the students that I'm working with to the best of my ability. And to be able to commiserate when things don't work out and to say, okay, how are we going to do it differently next time? All of our tutors work hard to, obviously increase student learning, but also to build confidence, which we know, especially for our younger students, can sometimes be really, really important. And then finally, in terms of, the big picture, our consistency. So both in terms of consistency of the tutor, but also from week to week. So again, everybody's different, but in general, for our younger students, most of our students have weekly 1-hour sessions. For some of our much younger students, maybe it's a little bit less. When we talk about high schoolers, we generally recommend 90-minute sessions. And I personally find that for my middle schoolers, at some point in middle school, it often makes sense to switch over to 90 minutes just based on, the content, the material that a student is working hard, to work through and to master. That being said, just in terms of the consistency, I certainly have students that I see much more frequently than 1 hour a week, right? Just depending on what makes the most sense for that student and for that family situation. So thinking about our academic support, all of our sessions include, generally speaking, include some combination of homework support. And I know that, especially as students get older and schools are asking more and more in terms of that homework, that can sometimes be a tension point, right? Be a friction point in the home. And our tutors, really work hard to help to smooth that over, right? To support students in their learning and in their homework. So, and then definitely we're also reviewing materials as needed, whether that is the material of this specific grade, this specific class, or something from a few years ago that maybe either sort of was glossed over at the time, or maybe they knew it and now they feel less confident about it. And then we're also previewing content to come. And I find for my students, even if I'm not helping them to become an expert, right, to master material, if I can give a little bit of that preview, right, it means that when they see it in the class, now it's almost a repetition for them, right? They are able to pick it up that much faster. And so all of our K-8 tutors work on a wide range of subjects. We know, right, if we're talking about students in the elementary grades, right, all of the subjects kind of flow into each other organically in the classroom anyway, and we want to make sure that our tutors are able to support in that wide range. And even in middle school, we know that I have students that I predominantly work with on math, but some weeks they come in and something is going on in their science class that they just need support on. And I really appreciate, as a tutor, that I'm able to have that flexibility, to talk to a family to see, okay, this is the main focus. But when needed, we're working on that essay this week because that's what's going on for them. And so, we can certainly multi-subject. I would say for some families, right, a specific subject area focus, with a targeted focus is, what they're really looking for. And again, obviously, for many families, there's some kind of form of hybrid, right? That we're mostly focused on this, but when needed, we look at other things as well. And then especially, for these students who are really developing their independence, working in those study skills, right? Helping students to be able to think about, what does it mean to be taking notes, right? What does my binder look like at the end of a class? Thinking about time management, especially as students are getting older, Certainly we see this in middle school. Students are transitioning to thinking about multiple teachers who aren't necessarily coordinating, right, and assigning, tests and projects and things like that. Helping students begin to think about study plans in a way that when they're younger, they aren't necessarily focused on as much. And then related sort of to all of this, but in terms of consistency, for many of my students, it's really been wonderful for me personally, and for my students as well, that I'm able to watch, to work with them year after year, and been able to watch them grow. And so certainly that's not always the way it works out, but I think for many tutors, it's really heartening to be able to develop this strong relationship with a student, a strong relationship with a parent, and be able to really, in the same way that in a similar way to the way that you watch your children grow and mature, it's also really amazing for me as a tutor to be able to see that as well, and to help these young people grow into the adults that they're slowly becoming. So, a second major category that we work with students on is enrichment, right? To go beyond the classroom, right? To build some combination of building long-term skills and or preparing for future classes. I have some students, there's some students at AJ that are looking for material that is, much more advanced than what is happening in their classroom. Potentially in a specific area. I have others where I wouldn't necessarily describe the material as more advanced per se, but just different, right? As Elizabeth mentioned, right, we know that there are some students who are just really passionate, right? They're full of stories and such imagination. And, depending on what's happening in the curriculum in the school, maybe they're not getting the opportunity to explore creative writing. Or we know, right, our schools have so many different curricula, so many different focuses. And I have some students where they come in and I see, okay, we really need a more direct focus on grammar, that's not necessarily what's happening in the classroom, while the classroom is focusing on other things. And one of the things that I really love about doing enrichment with students is being able to leverage and nurture the student's passion. That whatever that subject is, right, the topic that they're interested in, the subject they're interested in, or frankly, a subject that they're not necessarily interested in, but I can leverage their interests to make it something that they can be interested in. I was thinking about the students that I've worked with. I had a young student that we did sort of very early preliminary research. And that student, he wanted to write about famous internet cats, which on one level seems a little silly, but he did real research, and this was a young student, and we were able to talk about, what are reliable sources on the internet, right, at a preliminary level, able to work on writing, able to work on how do we construct a passage. I had another student who in middle school who read a nonfiction book about the history of the Golden State Warriors. And we were able to, again, leverage his real passion for basketball, but use it to help support his writing, which was something that student needed to work on in a way that I know would have been much more difficult, if I had been trying to work on the same composition skills through, a story that maybe didn't spark his interest in the same way. So in terms of sort of how these things fit in, we have summer is often a really valuable opportunity for this kind of enrichment, whether it's to prepare for the next year's class or just to really leverage a passion, right? Something that students don't necessarily have time for during the year when we know our lives and their lives are so busy. AJ Tutoring also has developed what we call ACE, Academic Core Enrichment. So these are sort of mini courses. They're designed to be somewhere in the 3 to 6 session range to develop additional skill, either in study skills, in English, in mathematics. And so these are to develop those foundations. So these are 3 different courses that a student can potentially take either during the year to the extent that there's time, or during a break. And finally, in terms of enrichment, the other sort of large category that we see are math competitions. So we have tutors that are specifically trained to help prepare students for a range of math competitions. Two of the more common that we see are kangaroo math and the AMC competitions. For students who are passionate about math, it can be a lot of fun to really look at math problems that are a little bit more outside the box than what students are often used to seeing in the classroom, and being able to tackle problems in sort of a different way. And finally, in terms of our large categories, there's application support. I just want to say from the beginning, application support is a whole world unto itself. And so, every school has their own nuances in terms of their specific requirements and things like that. And so, obviously I can't cover every detail of every single school. In general, what we're seeing these days are 4 major components to these applications that we support families on. There are testing. So currently, as we sit here today, the Catholic high schools in the area require a test called the HSPT, and we support students with that. We have developed our own material in terms of practice tests, in terms of workbooks to work through specific test-taking strategies, and review, and for students who needed to teach content to help support them for that. Historically, other schools have required different tests as well. And so currently, most of the schools and most of the non-Catholic private schools in our area are not requiring it. But I would say, the landscape continues to evolve. Some of you may have seen on the college level, right? Harvard University just announced that they're going to begin requiring the SAT again. And while, none of us can predict the future, I would fully expect that, what local middle schools and high schools are asking and are looking for will also continue to evolve. The vast majority, basically all private middle and high schools are also looking for some kind of interview. It looks different depending on the school. Sometimes it's one-on-one, sometimes it's a group interview, which, in some cases can actually involve some sort of collaborative activity that students are doing, and that the professionals from the school are kind of observing and asking questions. And so at AJ, the way that we support students for that is we help them to practice responding, right? We ask sample questions. We work with them to build confidence. And then another piece is we help them to brainstorm, right? While we can't necessarily predict exact questions, in the same way for all of us as adults have been interviewed for jobs, right? We have a sense of the sorts of questions we're going to be asked. And so we're able to help work with students to brainstorm, what are some of those key ideas about, a difficulty, a challenge that they overcame, or something they're really proud of, so that when they get asked the question during that interview process, right, they are able to, they don't have to come up with it on the spot, right, that they're able to sort of build from their preparation. So while for the Catholic schools, they require this test, and as part of that test, there's also an essay. For other schools, they don't necessarily require a test specifically. Almost all of them require some sort of timed writing sample. And then, of course, also the vast majority of schools require some sort of essay, that's prepared by the student as part of the application. And so for the timed writes, we have practice prompts. We have practice, that students are able to come into our offices and to, sort of see a fresh prompt and then write. And then we as tutors are able to look back that next week at our next session, and to talk through, okay, how did it feel, right? What are the ways that we can improve, our timing, our brainstorming. And then the other key, certainly for essays that are written at home, while we're supporting students in their writing, we always want to make sure that students are maintaining their own voice. As we can imagine, right, the administrators at these schools work with students, right? That's their job day in and day out. And they know, right? They can tell if really an adult is the one who is writing the essay. And so certainly we're supporting students, but we also want to make sure that it's authentic to their voice and really reflects who they are. And then finally, this is a component which is quite new, was new for this year, and which is analytical thinking exercises that a number of schools are now adding to the mix of what the process. And so these, while it looks a little bit different from school to school in general, there's some sort of pattern or problem that a student is being asked to solve. And the key difference here, as opposed to just like testing, is that the schools are then asking students to explain their thinking, right? Explain their reasoning. And so at AJ, we've developed material where we have structured practice solving these kinds of problems. And then where we can help structure with a student to explain their thinking, right? And we know, right, metacognition, the thinking about thinking, is something that is often a little bit challenging for our younger students, and that's something that develops as kids mature. And so having that direct ability to sort of talk it through with someone really can build a lot of confidence, and in some cases even give the vocabulary, right? It's not necessarily complex vocabulary, but the vocabulary for a student to be able to talk about their own thinking, to talk about their process. In relation to testing, just while it's just another piece, it's not directly related to application support. We also know as a company that that there are other schools that or other programs that a family might be interested in or applying to with other sorts of tests. As a company, we have, I won't say we've seen it all, but I'm sure it's very close, that over the years. And so certainly, there are many exams and that we have a direct material that we have developed, and there are many other exams that are less common, but that we as a company have also supported families on. And so, things, I won't get into all the acronyms, but lots of different things that we have supported families in over the years. And here we are at the, late April. I know that, I know for my own children, right, there's a lot of focus on making sure everything is planned, right, scheduled for the summer. And so, here at AJ for our younger students, again, it's a time of transition, whether it's from one school to another or just from one grade to another. And so, there is a lot of opportunity, an enormous amount of opportunity for customization, of course. But, we often end up working with students on a math boot camp, right, to strengthen their foundations that, we can potentially have. So there's a math boot camp specifically, which is a mix of one-on-one instruction and, a classroom support, right, a small group support. We have, we're always helping students to work on study skills. And, in some cases, I find that students are so focused on the content all year long that over the summer, we have a little bit more room to breathe, right? To be able to focus on these sort of foundational skills underneath, right? That based on a specific student's needs, their learning style, their current challenges, whatever is going on, but to really help them be ready to go for that next school year, where we know, right, every year students are being asked to do more and more, right, more and more independence. We work all kinds of primers, right, getting a jump start on the classes and content for the next year. This is particularly helpful for students, if there's a specific area of struggle or low confidence. We know, right, sometimes there are teachers who are notorious for being challenging, and I would say from my perspective, whether the teacher notoriety is deserved or not, right, the emotional anxiety that it can create in a student can be real, right? And for me to be able to help, for us to be able to help a student develop that confidence, develop that learning over the summer can be a real benefit to them when they start in the fall. And then of course, special interests. We have honestly a lot of really talented tutors who are passionate in an enormously wide range of things. And we have tutors who all year long do amazing work in sort of the standard subject areas, but really love having the opportunity to delve into some of their passions that are maybe a little bit outside of sort of the standard things that are taught in a classroom during the year. Whether we're looking at Greek mythology or new languages, right, history of film, public speaking. And really, the sky is the limit. We have little catalogs that we create every year that go through an enormous number of different topics. Many of those topics are sort of, at least we have many things that are designed specifically for K-8. There are other things that maybe as a default are targeting high schoolers. But I would say if a student is passionate, definitely reach out. I think we're able, again, because things are one-on-one, we're really able to customize and meet a student where they are. And then the other piece is summer is also a great time to get a jump start on the application process. There are some pieces of the process that, frankly, summer is maybe a little bit early to begin, but a lot of those, really developing the skill techniques, the strategies, right, to be able to talk through some of these things can really be helpful for a student also, especially we know, for those students that the school year is either going to be really challenging once classes start back up, or just they're going to be really busy, right? I know that so many students have such amazing extracurriculars and other things going on in their lives that make it really challenging to find the time once the school year begins.
Well, thank you so much, Micah. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion. If anyone had any questions that they wanted to ask us here about the presentation, or any questions that they might have submitted into the form, feel free to unmute.